Oh, one moment.
I'm ready.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Genealogy Garage. I am Julie Huffman, the genealogy librarian at the Los Angeles Public Library. Genealogy Garage is our monthly program where we present topics related to the world of genealogy. We are co-sponsored by the Southern California Genealogical Society and the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America, the Southern California chapter. Genealogy Garage typically happens the third Saturday of each month, but next month we are having a bonanza of an in-person day on the second Saturday of the month, June 10th. All day long, Central Library will host presentations and activities that celebrate African American excellence. It's called June Jubilee. Let me bring this up here. And we'll be having 3 African American related genealogy presentations and 4 hours of one-on-one genealogy assistance provided by the California African American Genealogical Society and the Southern California Genealogical Society as well. For presentations, Nika Sewell-Smith will discuss the basics of African American genealogy, and Chris Lodgson of A Just and Equitable California will talk about the potential for California reparations and what you might need to do genealogy-wise to take advantage of it. Nika and Chris will be joining us via Zoom, but you need to be here in person at Central Library in order to attend the events. Then culminating at 2 p.m. will be Kenyatta Berry, in person, giving an inspirational talk about telling the story of your ancestors. Go here to read about all the events happening. You can't see my finger very well. Okay. To read about all the presentations, events that are going on that day. And if there's anything you've been interested in hearing or learning about, just send me an email. Also, you can join my email list and I'll tell you what's going on around here. There's my email address. This session is being recorded and will be available to watch after the fact. So don't worry about taking too many notes. You can always go back and rewatch it at the same link that you're using to view it today. And for today's presentation, there is no handout that you need to download. If you are logged into YouTube with a YouTube account, you will be able to ask us questions as we go along. Just type whatever questions you might have into the comments box of the YouTube page. And then I will ask Clotilde at the end of our presentation your questions. So, without further ado, I am happy today to bring you Clotilde Yap, the Global Collections Manager of LAPL's newest genealogical database, My China Roots. She's joining us from London, and it's 7 p.m. her time. Is that right, Clotilde, 7 p.m.?
That is right, yes.
Thanks so much for spending your Saturday night with us.
No, pleasure.
So if you want to get started, Clotilde, maybe introduce yourself, say a few things about yourself, and then we can show your presentation. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, like Julie said, I'm dialing in from London. I should start by saying happy Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month to you all in the US. We don't have this monthly celebration in the UK yet. So I'm very glad to be a part of this. So what this workshop is about is this new database that is available through LAPL for researching your Chinese ancestors. So before I talk about this particular database, I want to, oh, I'm not sure my presentation is being shared yet, but here it is. So before I talk more about this tool and how you use it, I want to give a bit of context about our organization, why we first came about to assist people in tracing their Chinese roots, and what are some of the key challenges in this process. How is Chinese family history research so different from Western genealogy? And then I'll introduce myself a little bit in the process. So my China roots really began as a bespoke genealogy research company. We were founded over 10 years ago by my boss, Hui Han, who is Dutch. He was born and raised in Holland, but he is of Chinese Indonesian heritage. So he grew up completely disconnected from this part of his identity. And so it was only as an adult that he went back to China to study the language and to try and see what he could find out about his family. And he was really kind of shocked at the amount of information he was able to gather. He was able to trace hundreds of years of history, connected with almost as many relatives. And at that point, some of his friends and family members started asking him, "Oh, can you help me with my family history?" And that's when he realized that there was no one else really offering this service. So that's how we came about. And to date, we're still the only professional genealogy organization that specializes in Chinese ancestry research. And so what we do now mostly is we help families trace their family history back to China. We help with translation work. We organize roots trips back to China. And so a lot of us team members share this similar experience. I myself am so born and raised in London, but I'm French on my mum's side and Chinese Malaysian on my dad's side. So I also kind of grew up in a slightly disconnected setting where I wasn't really sure where I fit in. And so a few years back, we expanded to really start offering the platform online. So we've been adapting to the times, so to speak. This was as a result of urbanization happening in China. So a lot of cultural heritage and tangible heritage has been destroyed because of just how fast China has been growing, and also because of the pandemic. So it became more difficult to conduct family history research in China. So we've been creating online communities to bring people together and research their Chinese roots. So I'm really excited to be giving this talk for the LA Public Library, especially because the LA Public Library is the first US public library to subscribe to our database. So it feels extra special. Right. So now on to who can use our resource. So it was, of course, designed primarily for people of Chinese heritage, but more specifically for people whose families left China between the 1850s and the 1950s. So this was a period of mass migration from China for various reasons. There was a lot of unrest. There was civil wars. There was the Opium Wars, and then the fall of the Qing dynasty, which really provided push factors and pushed people out of China. And at that time, most Chinese immigrants who left, they came from two key provinces in Guangdong and Fujian. So these are in the southeast of China. And in those days, they really went all over the world, from Mauritius to New Zealand to Canada. But the collections that the collections that are particularly strong on the My China Roots website right now are the United States, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. And these are communities that are mostly English speaking. However, the long-term goal of My China Roots is to really be, the equivalent to ancestry.com for the entire Chinese diaspora. So we are adding collections every week from other areas of the world. And eventually we hope to also offer this to the Spanish-speaking Chinese world. So we'll have a version in Spanish, in Tagalog, in French. In fact, I'd love to hear if there's anyone tuning into the show right now, where you guys are based and which areas of the world you're researching. If you have Chinese ancestry that settled in a particular place, I'd love to know, where you guys are coming from. So next up, I want to talk a bit about why we exist and why we designed this online platform to start with. And it's really because there are some very unique challenges to Chinese family history research. Again, I would love to hear if there's anyone that has experienced some particular challenges or brick walls that they've been facing with their own research. But here are a few that we hear quite a bit. And this applies to Chinese Americans, but really from Chinese communities, from Chinese families all over the world. I hear these kinds of complaints of obstacles. One of the most common ones really is the language barrier. So a lot of people, because they haven't been living in China for 2, 3, 4, or even more generations, they no longer speak the language. So this makes it hard to communicate with relatives, for example, and conduct oral history interviews and really understand the subtleties of what might have happened in the family history. And then this can also be a challenge for those who don't read Chinese, because then they can't decipher what some documents might actually mean. And related to this challenge is one problem that is very specific to researching Chinese immigrant ancestors, and that is the vast discrepancies that exist in names and places. So names of Chinese immigrants were often transliterated by immigration officials who didn't speak Chinese, didn't read Chinese. So they just transcribed those names whichever way they thought best. So it was based on what they heard. So this is how you can end up with just a very strange array of spellings. And sometimes they would even misunderstand what was being said, and so they would record a first name as a last name. So these are just things you have to be aware of as you're trying to research your Chinese ancestors. To make things even more complicated, in traditional Chinese culture, it was typical for a man in particular to have as many as 4 or 5 different names, and these were used in different settings. And so a Chinese person could have used one on one document, but used another name on another document, which doesn't help. But this is why it's so important to collect as many documents and clues that might have alternative variations of the same person. And especially if those documents have Chinese characters, then the Chinese characters will enable you to confirm whether you have the right person and the same person. And the same applies to birthplaces. So I'll talk more about those a bit later.
Clotilde, we do have
Now,
a couple. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say we do have a couple of people who responded where they are coming in from, and I wasn't sure if you could see the comments, but let me bring them up.
I can see them. We have some people from Hong Kong, Australia, Mexico. Yes. Amazing. Amazing. Malaysia represent. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, it's great to have such a variety of peoples and cultures. And this is also why I love this job, because I really get to learn about the unique histories of Chinese communities really from all over the world. And there are, of course, a lot of parallels when you're researching Chinese ancestors in different areas, but there are also unique differences that make it particularly interesting. So if you can see this screen that I'm sharing right now, these are 3 documents that come from the My China Roots database, but they are from very different countries. So we have the US, Jamaica, and Singapore. And just to illustrate how different names can end up, all 3 individuals here have the same surname, but it's pronounced very differently and spelled very differently. And this is most likely because each of these areas, the makeup of the Chinese communities in these areas was a bit different. In the US, the people that immigrated early on were often from Guangdong province, but they spoke Toisanese, which is one of the main dialects in the Pearl River Delta, whereas Chinese Jamaicans, they were mostly Hakka, so they spoke Hakka. Whereas in Singapore, you had a very strong Hokkien or Fujian contingent. So Fujian province is where my Malaysian ancestors are from. So you can see how the same surname ended up as Choi, Chai, or Chua. So to recap, try to collect as many clues as you can, especially any that have Chinese characters. Now, another complaint or challenge that comes up is that there is a reluctance from relatives to talk about the past. This is always coming up, and it's important to remember that Chinese immigration often happened at a very chaotic period in China. There were all these push factors that I mentioned that can really leave scars. But on the flip side, there was probably a lot of trauma instilled on the US side if your family immigrated to the US. And in fact, to many other places. This applies to places like Australia and Mexico and Canada that all restricted Chinese immigration and made it hard, made it expensive, and made Chinese people feel unwelcome. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was in place for 60 plus years, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it, have heard of how it worked. So most Chinese people were not allowed into the US. There were a few exceptions, for example, if you were a merchant or if you were a teacher. And you may also have heard of paper sons. So a paper son is someone who immigrated to the US during the exclusion period under a false identity. Often this happened within a family. So someone's cousin would enter the US, but pretending to be the son of someone who was already in the US. And this can cause even more confusion because you end up researching someone who is described as one type of relative, but then you're told that they're not quite this relative, or they have several names, and you're not sure who to believe. So this is just important to be mindful of when you're doing the research, but also when you're speaking with relatives. It's important to approach these questions with a lot of care and empathy. Now, another big challenge is the absence or the difficulty of accessing records. And this is both on the China side, but also on the overseas side. Just a note on the Cultural Revolution. A lot of people assume actually that records were destroyed in China during the Cultural Revolution. This is true to some extent. So in the 60s and 70s, some Red Guards and even families themselves went so far as to burn their own family books. And this was because it was believed that genealogy and the practice of commemorating your ancestors was very backwards and would sort of drag China down and prevent it from being a modern nation state. And while that did happen, in many cases, records did survive. And at least in my experience, being in this, working with families over the last few years, in many cases, records have survived. So it's more a question of knowing where to look and what to look for. There is an assumption that China will be like any other Western country. So you should have birth certificates and death certificates and marriage certificates. But in fact, that's really not the case. And there is no centralized place where you can apply for such documents. For example, birth certificates in China were only introduced in 1996 on a nationwide level, and they were only made compulsory at that time. So prior to 1996, it was actually unlikely that most people would have a birth certificate. So when you're doing Chinese family history research, it really requires a different mode of thinking about the records themselves, how they are kept, and where they are kept. Which brings me to my main point, which is that the key difference between Chinese and Western genealogy is that you really want to be looking for a place as your starting point. And that place is the ancestral village that your family came from. The ancestral village is really the key to unlocking everything. It's where you are most likely to find relatives who will remember stories about your family. It's also home to many family heirlooms. It's where you're most likely to find a clan temple. For example, my father's ancestors in Fujian province, they come from a village called Yap village. And in the village, there's a temple that honors the Yap family name. And it has ancestral tablets and portraits and inscriptions that describe the history of how the Yap family arrived in this area. Likewise, we have a graveyard that is dedicated to our Yap ancestors. Supposedly, now I'm not sure if this is still the case because when I visited it, it was just a mound of dirt, but supposedly that is where our very first of our earliest Yap ancestors are still buried. So the first ones that arrived in the village some 300, 400 years ago. And it's also where you're most likely to find a family tree book. These are really, really valuable documents that are quite unique. They are compiled by the family. So in my case, there is a Yap family book that does not have my name in it because I'm not a man, but it has the name of my grandfather and his lineage. And some of these really go back hundreds of years, and they're updated every few years, usually by the local village elder. So just to recap, there are some undeniable challenges when you're doing this kind of work, with the language barrier, the difficulty to access certain records for historical reasons and practical reasons. But on the flip side, if you are lucky enough to find your village and even to find your family tree book, you can get your entire ancestry in one fell swoop. The good news is also that there's a really long history of root strips in China. People have been going back and tracing their history back to their village and visiting their villages for basically as long as Chinese people have been leaving. So it's relatively easy to do. Finally, because of how challenging this work is, it's also given rise to a lot of vibrant and supportive communities. You will probably have come across some Facebook groups that specialize in Chinese Canadian or Chinese Jamaican family history, as well as platforms like the My China Roots Discord server, which I'll talk about a bit later. Where essentially people come together and are really willing to share their experience and share their brick walls and help each other out. So on to the nitty-gritty of why we're all here, which is the database. How do you access it? How do you search for it? So when you navigate to the LA Public Library online resources, you will be able to find it under Education and Research. So under the letter M, My China Roots. And when you click on the My China Roots link, it should open it immediately for you. And if I'm not mistaken, you can also access this remotely. So if you're at home and you have an LA card number, you can just access the resource from there. So now I'm just going to pause sharing my screen so I can show you the website. I see we have a few more people who've logged in from Mexico, more from USA, and the Netherlands and Indonesia. Amazing. Okay, so when you click on the My China Roots library link, you'll see this search page. Now, just before I show you some of the records that we have, you'll see there are two main tabs. One is called Search, and this is for searching the collections themselves. But we also have resources for especially those who are just getting started. I want to highlight two of these, which is the surname database and the village database, which are really valuable if you're starting out. Let's imagine for a second that I have that my grandfather, his surname is Wong. I don't know much about him. I don't speak or read Chinese. I know that he settled in LA in the early 1900s. So I want to find out, firstly, something about our surname. I've only just heard that it means yellow, but otherwise I don't know anything about it. So if I type in Wong, I'll be able to read about the surname. I see that it's connected to a lot of other Chinese surnames, and it's popular in these regions. And as I scroll down, I can see that, oh, there are these different ways of spelling Wong in Chinese. And each of these means something a bit different. Now, the first one I saw is the one meaning yellow. So it looks like this is my Chinese surname. Now, if I click on Explore Wong meaning and origins, I can read more about the legendary origins of Huang. So it's been around since the third millenary BC. I can see where Huangs or Wongs come from in Southeast China. And I can also see how many family tree books for the Wong family are found on the My China Roots database. My favorite part of these pages is the distribution of surname spellings. So you can see how much variation there is from one dialect to the next. So this is, if you're starting out, it's usually helpful as well to ask yourself what ethnic group or what dialect your family spoke, because this can provide a clue as you're starting to look for documents. Even more amazing is the distribution by country. So you can just see how much adaptation there was from one country to the next when you look at these surnames. So that is the surname database. I really recommend you have a little play around. Next, I want to show you our village database. So again, the reason we built this is because the village is really at the heart of your Chinese family history research. A lot of people come to us and they say, oh, my ancestor's from Canton. How do I find out more about him? Now, the problem is, first, that Canton was a name that referred to potentially two places historically. And you find this out as you use the database, but it can refer to either Guangdong province, which is a huge province with over 100 million inhabitants. Now, in the in our place database, you can read more about all of these locations, what they're known for, and why they were home to so many overseas Chinese, where people went to from these regions. You can explore where it is on the map, and you can see what family records we have available. But I'd say the most useful thing about it is the alternative spellings. So Canton, funnily enough, could also refer to Guangzhou city, which is still a really big city of 15 million people. So you would really need to narrow it down a little bit to be able to find out more about your family. So let's say in this hypothetical case where my Chinese American grandfather, let's say his name was Sam Wong, I've only heard that he is from a region called Hoisan in Guangdong province. But if I type in Hoisan in Google Maps, I won't find anything. Nothing will turn up. So let's see what happens when I type this in here. I can see that it's an alternative spelling for a place called Taishan City. So on this page, I can again find out more about the region and discover that it is one of the 5 counties of the Pearl River Delta, which again is home to a lot of overseas Chinese. You can see here the really long list of different ways that this place has been spelled across different archives and documents. You can see the regions in the world that people have migrated to. But what is most valuable is this section at the bottom, which shows you place names inside Toisan, because Toisan is still a big region. If I were to try and find out more about my grandfather, Sam Wong, I would need to know what village in Toisan he lives in, and Taishan is a big city. So this list is to help you try and narrow down the places by showing them to a relative, see if any of them ring a bell. And again, the further narrow you get, as you get down to the town or the village level, we've also annotated major families that are known to have lived in this area. So this one, Sanhe, for example, does have a prominent Wong population. So that's the 2 top resources that we have available for those getting started. Now on to the record search. So there are 3 main ways that you can search for records on the database. The first one is by name. So I can type in any name in English or in Chinese. And for Sam Wong, I have got 1,300 results. Now, if I scroll down, I haven't applied any filters like birth dates, anything like that. But if I scroll down, I can see the breakdown of what kind of results I've got. So we have a few different locations, mostly the United States, but also Jamaica, Singapore. You can see the different types of documents that I found for this person. So we have a lot of immigration case files. These are case files that were put together during the Chinese exclusion period. And we also have alien case files, which came after the exclusion period, and they often contain naturalization papers. Let's look at one of these, for example. And you'll see that we work with different partners to add data, add records to the database. In this case, it's the National Archives of the US. For this document, the file has not been scanned yet, so we provide instead a link to the original National Archives reference, so that if you wanted to, you could apply for the original file. But there's still quite a bit of information that has been transcribed here, like the naturalization date, where the person was naturalized, when they first came into the country. So this is one example of an immigration record. But let's take a look at a few other filters. So you can filter by gender, and you can also filter by whether an image is available, for example, right at the bottom. Now you'll see that there are also a lot of matches here in directory records. Now, directories are particularly useful. There was a series of directories published over the years by different groups, but specifically for Chinese communities. So this, I would say, is one of our strongest overseas collections. I know of no other collection of Chinese directories. And they're valuable because they're often, again, bilingual. And even if it seems like there is no individual name. In fact, a lot of Chinese businesses actually carried the name of the owner in them. So they can still be incredibly valuable for this kind of research. So we've looked at directories, and there's one more source that I want to highlight, which is cemeteries. So we really focus on trying to get as many tombstones, as much cemetery data as we can. And this is because tombstones in a Chinese genealogy context are very, very valuable. So we're looking now at a tombstone of a Wong Sam. His name is a bit longer. It's Sun Shek Sam Wong, from the Chinese Cemetery of Los Angeles. The reason why we emphasize tombstones so much is because these traditional Chinese ones, they often have much more information recorded in Chinese compared to English. So here, for example, this individual has 2 Chinese names recorded, which means that you can search for these 2 names separately in future Chinese collections. In addition, you don't only have his birth date and death date, but on the right-hand side of this tombstone is the exact birthplace of the person in China. And you'll see that we've transcribed it, and we've also connected it to our village database, so you can immediately see where it is on the map. So definitely check out your family's tombstones if you can. The final thing that we've done on these pages is whenever a Chinese name is available, you can scroll down to this section and see if we found any matching records for this Chinese name in our Chinese collections. Which brings me to my next category of searching. So here we're looking at full text records in our Chinese family tree books. We have a very big collection of Chinese genealogies. They're called zupus or jiapus. But some of these contain thousands of names, and we have yet to fully index them name by name. So in the meantime, they're searchable through OCR and through full text. So what we're essentially checking is scanning every page to see if the characters match. It's not 100% accurate, but for now, it's pretty good. So here we have 2 pretty strong matches, I would say, of this person, Sun Shek Sam Wong, that we just found in the LA Chinese Cemetery. We're looking at 2 different books of the Wong clan from Hoisan. So this matches from Taishan. This matches the place that my hypothetical grandfather was from. So if I click on the match, I can see once it loads, I can see on the page where the name appears. And this is quite a typical modern Zupu publication, where you can see them formatted into trees. So as I zoom in, I can see this individual had 2 sons. I can see his father's name. I can see his mother's maiden name. And you'll see that we have this built-in Chinese dictionary, which, as you hover over a character and as you click on a character, shows you what the words mean. Again, it's not as good as a native translating, but it still helps you get a sense of what's going on. And what I want to just show you here that's pretty cool with these books is you'll see at the top of the page, it lists a number. This refers to the generation that the ancestor belongs to. So in this case, my Sam Wong is of the 25th generation. That means that in the book, there are 25 generations or 24 generations from this Sam Wong. And this is why these books are so valuable. In one fell swoop, you can find your entire lineage. So if you wanted to check whether this was the right person, you would need to first check that the name correspond of the sons and of the parents. And if they do, then this is most likely a match for you. What you can also do is click on the information button for these books, or in the left-hand panel, click View Details of this record, and you'll be able to browse the full book, see when it was published and where. Sometimes we list the editing house. These books are often published by clan associations, so there would be a Wong clan association in Hoisan that put this together. So we've just been looking at full text records, which are also available from the main search page in the second tab. So you can type in a first name or copy paste any first name that you come across in Chinese, plus a last name. And you'll be able to see all the matches across all of our Chinese sources. I'm just going to check on if we've had any comments.
We have had a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to ask for those, if you want to be asked those now. Do you want me to go ahead and do that, or I've been
I can keep
marking which
going.
one.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead? Because I think we can cover them maybe at the end.
Okay, sounds good. So the last way you can search with the database is by browsing our sources. So this is if you really want to get a bird's eye view of what kind of collections are available. Maybe you're just looking for resources in a particular place. So here, these are all of the sources that we have. Again, you can filter them by country. We have 11 countries available. And there's really a broad variety, from directories to immigration files, cemeteries. So let's look at some of these. I think these are particularly valuable. We only have a few of these historical annals, what we call historical annals. They are kind of like directories, but they are basically books compiled by the community to commemorate the community at a certain time. And they're really great because they often contain biographies, but also descriptions of organizations that were active within the community. In Jamaica, for example, they had this beauty pageant that they held every year, and you have photos of the beauty pageant year by year. These are really fun to look at. And they also contain historical accounts of the community itself, how it first arrived. So for every source, when it's been indexed, you will be able to read a bit of context about this publication, and you can also search for a person directly inside the collection. In this case, you can click on View All Persons in the source, and let me just refresh. And you'll be able to see all of the people that are recorded in this book. This is a really great collection, the Chinese Jamaican Annal, because you see it has photographs as well. It has details on people's birthplaces. It has the names and the addresses of the businesses that they ran. These can be really detailed. And we have some similar records for Hawaii that are just quite fun to browse. Okay, so back to our sources. Some other cool collections that we have, as I mentioned before, are the directories. We have quite a few directories for the United States. Some are pretty niche, like this New York Cuban business directory. We have quite a few student directories as well. And again, these were often compiled by Chinese business owners, and they have information both in Chinese and English. You may notice some which have not been indexed yet, in which case you can still open them and browse them image by image. So yeah, these are the sources that we have available. I'm just going to stop sharing for a quick second and get back to my slides. So just bear with me. To recap the makeup of these collections, they're really split into two big groups, right? We have the overseas Chinese collections, which cover about 11 countries, over 300,000 individuals. But the biggest collection that we have to date are the mainland Chinese ones. So these are primarily genealogies, family tree books containing millions of names. You do need a Chinese name to search for them, but we are in the process of beginning to index them name by name. And once we have those, it'll be much easier to translate them and transliterate them into different, for example, pinyin or different pronunciations to make them more accessible. What I'm quite excited to share as well is that we have some incoming collections. Over the next few months, we'll be able to add, for the United States at least, a lot of census records, passenger lists, naturalization records, and as I said, more indexed Chinese genealogies. We are adding things every week and also for other regions aside from the US. So if you don't get any matches right away, do check back in a few weeks, see if that's still the case. But also, I really invite you to email me or email us if you're interested in a particular region that we don't cover yet. It's always great to know, what people are interested in, because we do have a lot of collections in our backlog that we simply haven't gotten to yet. So if enough people request them, we will happily upload them. And so just on a final note, I wanted to spotlight our My China Roots Discord server, which is a free online community which brings together a pretty wide array of people who are currently doing family history research. It's open to anyone, young and old. I think our youngest member is about 14 years old, and our eldest participant is in his 90s. And it's really fun. I mean, people just come together, and we sometimes have virtual hangouts or research labs where we share brick walls and questions that we might have, or just a story corner where we share what we've been thinking about or how we're thinking of preserving our family history memories. So the link is right there, mychinaroots.com/community. Do feel free to join and continue the conversation after this presentation ends. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys might have about Chinese genealogy or the database.
I've got a couple here that I highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
One person was asking if there's a genealogy site for Korean heritage that you might know about.
Good question. To my knowledge, there isn't a website, as in a database that you can search, but there is one service called, I think it's koreangenealogy.com, something really straightforward like that, where they provide a similar service to us in that you can hire them for research if it's something specific that you're looking for. If you're looking for your family book, in Korea they have a very similar culture of keeping a family tree genealogy book by clan, by surname. So I can double check the link to that, but I believe it was, Korea genealogy.com, like that. Koreangenealogy.org, I think it was. It's more of a blog, but they do have, you can get help from there.
Does that look like it? Just to make it visual for people?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Let's see here. Another specific research question maybe you might have some insight on.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any information from Mexico? So, not quite to the same level as the US. To my knowledge, we don't have any immediate Mexican collections online, but I am aware that there are some in existence. I really encourage you to check on familysearch.org, because I believe they have a lot of civil records for Mexico in general. So that would be a good starting point if you're looking for, birth records or marriage records. You might find that on Family Search. As for specific Chinese records on Chinese Mexicans, I know that the Mexican National Archives, they kept collections of all their Chinese immigrants, and these are recorded. Uh, they're all available online. All of those, all of the names are available online. The documents are not. They've not been scanned, but the National Archives have transcribed the names of each immigrant and the region of origin and when they arrived in particular provinces. It's a little bit hard to find. It's sort of a very deeply nested file inside the Mexican National Archives. But I believe Family Search have also got a guide to researching Mexican immigrant ancestors, and you might be able to find that information there.
We've had many questions about the Los Angeles Public Library card. And so let me answer that first. So to get one of our library cards, they are free, but you have to be a citizen of California. You can live anywhere in California, a resident of California, I mean. Sometimes it feels like it's a separate citizenship, but if you are a resident here in California, anywhere, San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, you can get one for free, but you have to be at Central Library or one of our branches in person, and you should have to show proof of your California residency. So that's step one. Now, if you do not live in California and you want to get one of our library cards, we do issue a 1-year long library card, but it's $50 for each year, and you have to be here in person to sign up for it. So it's kind of pricey, but that's one of our policies for that if you don't live in California. But what I wanted to ask Clotilde is, what is the difference between the library's subscription to My China Roots and just if you would go onto the website on your own, not through the library?
That's a great question. So if you're accessing the database through the library, first main difference is that it's free. So we have a free version as well for individuals. If you were to just log in through mychinaroots.com, create a free account, you can play around a little bit. We have a trial period, but then we charge for access to all of the collections, essentially anything that we may have indexed and transcribed and spent time digitizing, then we would charge for access. The premium subscription is $89 per year. But what that comes with, and that is different from the library version, is that you can build your own family tree. We've just launched a hint system, which means that similar to ancestry.com, as you're building your family tree, if we find a matching record of an ancestor, then we'll notify you. You get an email and we'll say, hey, we found something that looks relevant to you. You don't get any of that through the institutional version of the account. So it's all anonymous. But on the individual version, you'd be able to, bookmark records, save them to your tree, things like that.
And also on the, not the library subscription, but just the general website, you're able to hire research help or translation help. Did you say that you have that service?
Yes, that's true. I mean, this is, again, separate, but also if people are getting stuck at a certain stage or they want to organize a roots trip back to China, then we have very experienced cultural interpreters and translators who can help you make that process as smooth as possible. Of course, it's possible for people to do this themselves, but these are incredibly intense experiences. So it always helps to have someone who knows what they're doing and who can hold your hand during the process. So yeah, that's also, all our services are listed on mychinaroots.com. We also, if you happen to already have your family tree book, for example, and you want to understand what's going on and what it means, we can translate the whole thing for you. We build these interactive websites. We can transcribe the family tree for you. We can do all sorts of things. It's really very customized.
Oh, that's really cool. Are you, people from your company still, do you go into China and try to get like photograph records? Are you still gathering new material for your website?
Yes, we are. So I'm in charge of mostly gathering the overseas collections, the ones for everywhere in the world except China. And my colleague is in charge with the Chinese collections. So on the China side, we mostly work with government archives, local archives. There are a few universities that have some quite important collections of gazetteers, for example. Gazetteers were compiled region by region, and they provided a history of the land, um, sometimes on a really detailed, like geological level, geographical level, but they could also include information on the history of certain families and how they settled in certain areas. So, yeah, we're continually trying to increase our Chinese collections, working with different partners. Um, yeah, did I answer your question? I hope so.
Yeah. Donna just is writing again for some clarification. So if you just go to the website without paying on your own, or if you go through LAPL's subscription, what
Hmm.
sorts of things, is there an advantage to going through LAPL subscription, or what are the advantages? Because I assume there is an advantage rather than if you just go on.
Yes, because you get full access completely free.
Okay.
Whereas if you were just an individual going through the our website, um, you could get full access, but only for a trial period, and then you would need to upgrade and pay a yearly or a monthly fee. Um,
It might be kind of like something what Family Search does, where maybe you can run a search and see some results, but if you want to actually look at the document or the transcription of the result, you'd have to sign in with your account. Is it something like that?
that's right. That's
Okay.
right, exactly. So you can, as a free individual user, non-LAPL user, you can go on mychinaroots.com, you can type in a name into the form and see that there are, I don't know, 56 results. You can see where these results are from, whether it's a tombstone, whether it's an immigration record. But if you want to click in and see the details, see the Chinese name transcription, see the original image, then you would be asked to either log in or subscribe or start a trial.
Which is a good
Um,
argument for getting one of our cards, all you California residents. If you are driving through LA, swing by one of our branches, just have your ID and get a card, go back to your faraway California residency, and you can tap into My China Roots via our website.
mhm. Or if I may add, if you are not in California, I'm not sure if there are a few people who are not in some listeners are not in California, but you could also email your local library and just tell them, it might be good to subscribe to mychinaroots.com. Um, yeah, we are available in a few other public libraries very soon. The San Francisco Public Library, um, and a few others, Allen County Public Library, Boston Public Library. So, yeah.
Well, and we have Betty. Betty is in Canada, and she was asking about Canada.
Oh.
So, Betty, go to your local branch and get the Canadians on board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are there any other questions out there? And just remember, this has been recorded. So if you want to rewatch it, just in case you missed a couple things, go right ahead. It should be available fairly soon. We try to add captions, but that takes a little bit of time. But you should be able to come back through our YouTube page to watch us again if you'd like. I don't see any other questions at the moment. So why don't we wrap up, and feel free to email me or Clotilde if you have other things later. And I just want to thank you so much, Clotilde, for spending your night with us. We really appreciate it.
No, it's been fun. Thank you so much for hosting, for having me, for moderating, and thank you to everyone for joining.
Okay, see everybody later. We've got a lot of nice comments here. And have a very nice weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Happy weekend.